act to follow, especially with history. But that's what I'm going to do. I've looked at a few publications that I want to share with you, and I'll leave them up here for after the program. You can take a look at them. Some children's books, and if you get the paper, the Daily News, they had a nice insert yesterday with a lot of information. Probably a lot of this information is familiar to many of you, but it may or may not be. And so I'm just going to take us through what happened to bring us where we are with the celebration of Juneteenth. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. General Orders Number 3. Juneteenth and General Order Number 3 was read on June 19, 1865, announcing that all slaves were free is one of Galveston's most important historical moments. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation on September 22, 1862. Notice the discrepancy. Issued under powers granted to the president as a fit and necessary war measure. The proclamation declared that on the first day of January AD 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state of or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. However, Lincoln's proclamation would have little impact on Texas at that time due to the small number of Union troops available to enforce it. 2.5 years later, in June of 1865, more than 2,000 federal soldiers of the 13th Army Corps arrived in Galveston, and with them were Major General Gordon Granger, commanding officer, District of Texas. Granger delivered to Galveston General Orders Number 3. The order informed all Texans that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves were free. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? It was from that moment that Juneteenth would be born. Since then, the annual commemoration has grown from local roots to a national celebration featuring parades, readings, processions, and more. In the late 70s, the Texas legislature declared Juneteenth a holiday of significance, particularly to the blacks of Texas. Texas was the first state to establish Juneteenth as a state holiday under legislation introduced by freshman Democratic State Representative Al Edwards of Houston. The law passed through the Texas legislature in 1979 and was officially made a state holiday on January 1, 1980. After Texas recognized the date, many states followed suit. Currently, 47 of the 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia have recognized Juneteenth as either a state holiday or ceremonial holiday, a day of observance. In '79, the Galveston Juneteenth Committee, under the leadership of former city manager Doug Matthews and Texas Rep. Al Edwards, initiated an annual Juneteenth celebration on the lawn of Ashton Villa. The event commemorates the reading of General Orders Number 3 through prayer, reflections, and community leadership. In 2006, the Juneteenth Committee with the City of Galveston erected a statue of the reading of the order that remains a permanent reminder of residents and visitors. The City of Galveston transferred the building and grounds in November 2018 to the Galveston Historical Foundation, who preserved and managed the property since. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. As African Americans from Galveston and Texas migrated to other areas of the country, they took Juneteenth with them. Today, the 19th of June is celebrated in more than 200 cities throughout the United States. In Galveston and elsewhere, Juneteenth is observed with speeches and song, picnics, parades, and exhibits of African American history and art. I know this is old hat to a lot of you, but it's a good reminder of how this all happened. The history of celebration commemorating Juneteenth in General Orders Number 3 is significant and is a defining piece of modern commemorations. On January 2, 1866, Flake's Bulletin, a Galveston newspaper, reported on an emancipation celebration. Quote, "The colored people of Galveston celebrated their emancipation from slavery yesterday by a procession. Notwithstanding the storm, some 800 or 1,000 men, women, and children took part in the demonstration. The procession was orderly and credible to those participating in it. A meeting was held at the Colored Church on Broadway, that's present-day Reedy Chapel, at which addresses were delivered by a number of speakers, among whom was General Gregory, Assistant Commissioner of Freedmen. The general gave them a great deal of good, plain advice, which, if they follow, will redound to their well-being and prosperity. The Emancipation Proclamation of President Lincoln was read. The singing of John Brown's Body Lies a Moldering in the Ground was also part of the program. So far as we observed, there was no interference nor any improper conduct on the part of spectators. After some years of reportage of a flagrantly racist nature, the white Galveston newspapers gradually moved to a less biased accounting of the emancipation celebrations. And by 1878, an anonymous reporter had this to say of the day's celebrants. The old plantation melodies were transformed into a new song, and the sunshine of the dreams that once dwelt in their hearts burst full and fair upon them as they both felt and realized the fullness of the freedom that is now theirs, not only to enjoy but to perpetuate. The conclusion of the day went out amid the pleasures that always cluster about the ballroom, and if a memory of olden times came back from the ringing shout of the dancers as the breakdown was getting the benefit of their best kicks, it is to be hoped that the contrast suggested more of a pleasure than regret. The colored people of Galveston certainly deported themselves creditably in celebrating their 4th of July. When that was written, the newspaper was also printing wire reports from across the state devoted to emancipation celebrations in Brenham, Marlin, Liberty, Bastrop, and elsewhere. African Americans throughout Texas observed June 19th with parades and picnics, speeches, and dancing. In many communities, groups bought their own land for this and other events, often naming these tracts Emancipation Park. The day of, quote, monstrous and brilliant, unquote, parades in Galveston gave way to more private Juneteenth celebrations in the middle years of the 20th century. With families gathering for beach parties and cookouts, churches observed Emancipation Day with the reverent singing of the song, Lift Every Voice, which we'll get to sing. The official song of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the plea to remember the significance of the 19th of June and the joy of freedom. When Texas fell and Granger dispatched his now famous Order Number 3, it wasn't exactly instant magic for most of the Lone Star's 250,000 slaves. On plantations, masters had to decide when and how to announce the news, or wait for a government agent to arrive, and it was not uncommon for them to delay until after the harvest. Even in Galveston City, the ex-Confederate mayor flouted the army by forcing the freed people back to work. Defying confusion and delay, terror and violence, the newly freed, in quote, black men and women of Texas, with the aid of Freedmen's Bureau, now had a date to rally around. In one of the most inspiring grassroots efforts of the post-Civil War period, they transformed June 19th from a day of unheeded military orders into their own annual rite, Juneteenth, beginning 1 year later in 1866. Strengthening the holiday's chances of survival was its move across state lines, one person, one family, one carload or train ticket at a time. The people from Texas took Juneteenth Day to Los Angeles, Oakland, Seattle, and other places they went. This is a quote. The way it was explained to me, one heir to the tradition is quoted as saying, "The 19th of June wasn't the exact day the Negro was freed, but that's the day they told them that they was free." And my daddy told me that they hooped and hollered and bored holes in trees with augers and stopped it up with gunpowder and light, and that it would blast their celebration. In 1979, Texas became the first state to make Juneteenth an official holiday. President Joe Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day into law June 17, 2021. At his side was Opal Lee. You all are going to remember Opal, the grandmother of Juneteenth. And how many of you recall walking with her? I think it was about 10 years ago, wasn't it? Not that long? Anyway, we started over on the seawall, and she was marching for Juneteenth to become a national holiday, and a bunch of us walked with her. Yeah, when that was dedicated, right? Anyway, she was then like 87, I think. So she came to Galveston. She led a march and helped to support that. At 22nd and Strand is the mural Absolute Equality. Has everybody seen that? And if you haven't, or if you haven't spent time there, know that you can point your phone at each of the pieces of the mural and get a really good history spoken to you about that. It's on the wall of the Osterman building, and it's interactive depiction of the history of Juneteenth. Don't miss it. And the historical plaque, yeah, well, it could be that, on the corner. It commemorates the oldest known celebration of the end of slavery in the U.S., Juneteenth. Please rise in body or spirit to sing our closing hymn. Lift every voice and sing. It is number 149.